Great. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Sorry for the very small delay there. I am Matt Hawkins. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Global Compassion Coalition, and it's a delight to be with you this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. We are co-hosting this event with the brilliant people at Weave, the Social Fabric Project, and the event focused on how do we build thriving communities. And it is wonderful to see that so many people have joined us, but perhaps that shouldn't really be a major surprise. Our need for connection, belonging, a feeling of community is deeply hardwired into us. So it's no wonder that people want to learn how we can get some more of it. We know that strong communities are essential for our well-being, our mental, our physical health. They reduce prejudice and outgroup antipathy. And there is also growing evidence that having a strong community is a powerful defense against the rise of extremism and authoritarianism. But we also know that in our modern society, community is increasingly facing many challenges. The rise of megacities across the world have increased loneliness because our chances to really connect and feel belonging to one another has been diminished. Existential crises like climate change, war, and conflict are putting pressure onto resources, which is leading to conflict and division. And decreased government investment in public services as a result of privatization has, in many parts of the world at least, led to a decimation of community spaces and services. So, what are we going to do about all of that? Today's urgent and fundamental question: how do we bring back, protect, and re-energize communities and our sense of community as well? So, addressing this, we have four experts, four people who are deeply engaged both in the work of thinking about communities, but also practically in building them. We have Francis Kraft, who is Senior Manager of Engagement at Weave, which connects, supports, and invests in local leaders to help them create knitted together, woven communities. We have Ashley Esposito, who is the 2021 Baltimore Weaver Awardee, an elected school board member and executive director of Baltimore Renters United. We have Peter Waswa. Peter is a Compassion Connector, is the Compassion Connector National Lead in Uganda, focused on building communities of compassion. And Dr. Julian Abel is the founder and director of Compassionate Communities UK. So, together with these fantastic four speakers, we are going to be moving through three overarching questions which are going to structure today's discussion. What is community? What benefits does it bring? And then this final sort of fundamental question that we're leading to: how do we protect and grow them worldwide? As we go along, as always, we would really welcome your thoughts, feedback, questions, and ideas, and I will try to look at them as much as possible and bring them into the discussion, and certainly give space at the end for any questions that you've raised. But enough of me. So to start us off, I want to ask each panelist individually if you could just say what community means to you. Tell us about your own community, perhaps how you define it, and why is it important to you. Ashley, you happy to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question too. Community means to me, I kind of always reference the community that I grew up in. I grew up in a really small town in southern Arizona near the border of Mexico. It's about 1,400 people. And community to me was really everyone knowing each other's names, people within our community taking leadership roles and oftentimes doing multiple roles, no one really going without, or us being able to come together as a community and be really resourceful. And so when I was looking for a community to start a family with my husband, we found this cute little neighborhood in Southwest Baltimore called Violetville. And we came here randomly one year for Halloween and saw kind of what I was imagining for myself and what type of community that I would want to start a family in. And just seeing people running around in each other's yards and all the kids flooding the streets really gave me that sense of community that I hadn't felt in a really long time since I left Arizona. So I think it's really simple. I think just being on a first name basis with people and knowing that you can go across the street and like ask to borrow somebody's lawnmower or just helping each other. That's what really community means to me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ashley. And now for perhaps a contrasting perspective over the pond. Julian, how about you?
So I've got my own background is actually in healthcare, and from my perspective, community is a place where which is where life happens, and I would say community happens when two people come together and start relating to each other, and we all belong to multiple communities. So that you not only do you have communities in families and friends, you have communities in neighborhoods, but you also have communities in workplaces, in educational institutions, in places of worship, the communities in civic spaces, in parks and museums and galleries, and there are online communities. And communities, I'm going to say this again and again, I'm sure, but actually, communities is how we evolved over 2 million years of human evolution, and it's deeply embedded in us. And so we all have this kind of incredible potential for relating to the people and the world around us. And if you like, then community is maybe it's an act of relating to people and place, which is what it is to be human. So it's everywhere.
Lovely. Thanks, Julian. And don't worry, I'll be giving you an excuse to come back to some of that, I suppose, the evolutionary side to community soon. Frances, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Matt. It's so good to be here with all of you today. When Ash was speaking about how she grew up, it really reminded me that I grew up in Florida, and I grew up on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico. And so my childhood was very isolated in some ways. We weren't near a lot of people. We didn't really enjoy a strong community. My family was very tight-knit. I felt a real sense of belonging there. Spanish was our first language. We had, strong customs and culture, but my parents didn't have a lot of friends. They kept to themselves. So for me, the place that I first really felt a sense of community was with my husband, raising our children outside Chicago. And even more so when I became a teacher very late in life. I didn't have a lot of strong formal boundaries between myself as a teacher and families and students, in that we were really there to support each other. So to me, community really meant building trust and really wanting the very best for other people who you cared about.
Thank you, Frances. And Peter.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. For me, community are people that know me, I know them. We are bound together by our experiences, by our issues and challenges, our happinesses. We have a relationship. We are connected in some way. We are there for each other when we need people to be there for us. Yeah, it is not people that necessarily people that I live with in a community, in a geographical area, but they are people that are near to me in what we are trying to do. We are facing the same direction. We are moving together and trying to achieve the same objectives. For me, this is what community means.
Beautiful. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Frances, I'm going to just come back to you now. So we're getting a varied conception of what community means to different people. As someone based in the States, obviously you've been moved to work with and help set up Weave as a project. Why do you think there is this increasing need for a sense of community? What's the pressures that are leading to that?
Oh, such a great question. I was telling Julian, I attended the launch of the Happiness Report just yesterday here in DC, a global report, really looking into why people around the world in some countries are happier, more connected, and where the US is struggling so much. And we really rely on our weavers. We call people who join weavers across the country to tell us what their challenges are. And we really tend to see there is a disconnection. There's an uncertainty about life. There's so much of more people living individually, just trying to either just get by, and there isn't an intentionality to the connection. So when they do come to weave, what I see makes a difference is that intentionality behind it, just whether it's a relational one-on-one, asking people just to talk and tell their stories to each other. That's something that people are kind of, whether they're on social media or they're just going from chore to chore in their daily life, there isn't that time to stop and really see someone. When we talk about seeing someone, understanding them, listening to them, that can't happen when we're rushing from place to place and we're not in community with people. So I'm seeing that as a real barrier to connection.
And then for you, Ashley, obviously, as someone who joined the Weave project, can you take yourself back to what made you step into doing that? What was there? Accumulation of kind of feelings and thoughts, or was there one moment where you just thought, you know what, something's not quite right and I want to do something about it?
Yeah, I think when we found this community, we were already like committed to, buying a house here, settling here. And so we were very intentional about wanting to feel connected, and in the city, really the best way to get connected or at least have an entry into like meeting neighbors and stuff is community associations. So most neighborhood, I think there's like 250 some neighborhoods in Baltimore City, and most of them have a community association. So that was our first entry into like saying, hey, where are our neighbors? Like, how do we find them? And it's also a really good place because that's where you go to also solve problems collectively as a community. And I think the challenge there is that sometimes these meetings aren't always accessible to everyone. So that's really how I got started in weaving, is trying to create the infrastructure and an unassociation that would really meet people where they are, make it more inclusive, because we found out from like one neighbor, some had mobility issues, some were more socially, like they felt more comfortable in a virtual space. So making all those entry points, and making it possible for everybody to connect with each other, I think was really important in fighting loneliness and really coming together to like solve problems. And I think just a common thread in like all the work that I've done since has just been very intentional about making things accessible, because there are so many challenges. Like we don't have as much free time, or like I said, some spaces aren't accessible to everyone. So how do we make sure that everyone feels included and everyone feels a part of the community and doesn't feel left out of it?
And then I suppose to look at the perhaps slightly different context, Peter, from the work that we've done together through the Connectors program, this is quite an oversimplification perhaps, but I have this feeling that there's a great sense of community where you are, and bringing people together to take action can happen because of that. But obviously there's other types of pressures on communities where you are. So what pressures do you feel that there are coming down on your community, and what might influence whether a community feels connected or not in Uganda?
Thank you, Matt. The pressures are many. There are as many as maybe the stories are from here. But I can tell you financial inequality is a big one. I can tell you that inadequate provision of services is a big one. I can also tell you that there are some issues of extremism, not so much in Africa here, but yes, they are there also. And there are other issues.
I think we may have lost Peter briefly there, so I'll try and just bring it back. So Julian, I was going to come to you next, which was to ask you, taking all of that kind of together, this is your invitation to do your bit, as you were just saying. Why do we feel this need to be part of community? And I suppose over time, what do you chart as some of the reasons why increasingly in the 21st century that has become harder, especially, I suppose, in the West or the global North?
Thank you, and good question, and I'll see if I can answer it. Fingers crossed. So one of the, you know, there's so many different ways of coming at this question, but one of the things is that human beings evolved in small communities of anything to 25 to 100 people. And we did this over a period of 2 million years. And those communities are quite kind of vulnerable. And so what that means is that that in order to survive, we had to work together. And in order to work together, we have to have the apparatus that allows us to work together. And those kind of essence of those things are kindness, compassion, care for one another, about working together. This whole idea of survival of the fittest is a bit of a Victorian nightmare that is really not an accurate description of a biology. Our biology is much better described by the term survival of the kindest. And when you look for all of the biological, biochemical, genetic, physiological, morphological, whatever logical you want to add to it, you see it throughout the animal kingdom. This thing about belonging and kindness and care is present in 600 million years of animal evolution. And what that means is that every single human being has the potential to be compassionate and kind. And the great thing about that is that we all recognize this in ourselves anyway. We don't need anyone to tell us that. We know when we feel good, it's about our connection to the world around us, the people we know and love and the places we know and love, that sense of belonging. And we strive for it. I consider it to be the most powerful human drive we have, is that sense of belonging. But somewhere along the way, and I like to cogitate on this way too much, we've lost our way. That somehow we've entered into a world of survival of the fittest. It's a story that we've been told, that we've believed. And that story says, yes, the people who have the most deserve to have the most because they're the greatest. So this is just rubbish. And it's not just rubbish, it's incredibly harmful. And the challenge we have for humanity now is, how do we find our way back to community, to connection, to care, to love, to compassion, for thinking about our relationship, not just to ourselves, but to the world around us. But the good news of that is many people know this anyway, that this is deeply embedded in us as human beings, and that there are fantastic examples of it all over the world. Once we recognize that community is there, that we have the potential, that our eyes open to the treasures of community. And when we start doing that, we start placing increasing emphasis in this in our lives, and we see this there's like, I'm sure, you know, Francis and I have spoken in the past, but community building, it's incredibly addictive because it makes the heart soar when you see people connect and you see people treat each other with care and kindness. It's so deep and powerful within us. So that if you like, the kind of environmental catastrophe, the rise of the right wing, the increasing number of wars around the globe, the increasing inequality, we have to find our way out of that in one way or another. And irrespective of what the future holds for it, it's going to look a lot better if we do it together rather than fighting each other.
Extremely good job with the very challenging question. And Francis, I did just want to get your perspective on some of what Julian was saying, I suppose particularly around the kind of aspects of narrative of the stories that we're telling ourselves, and how much you see that played out in where you are in America, whether it's in the media or politics or economic thinking, and how much you think that has created the divisions that you are obviously trying to counter. Sounds like a more divisive word again, but you get what I mean.
I do, and thanks, Matt. I was, as Julian, as you were speaking, I was taking notes because, yeah, you were just making me think of so many things that either I've experienced myself or, you know, in conversation that I hear from friends or colleagues or weavers also. I feel that the narrative, especially in the US, that I experience is one of scarcity instead of abundance. And I think that we have so many spaces in our lives where, whether it's schools and families, or, you know, they just need to get the best for their child because it's so important that they make sure their future is secure, and they're forgetting about, you know, other kids. As a teacher, I saw this a lot. I became a teacher later in life to work on issues around equity and racism in education. And to see that individualism that, you know, so many of us get onto that treadmill, and it's really about just making sure that we get what we need or what we think we need. And as Julian, as you were speaking, it really made me think that how often, where are those spaces where we get to feel, to have that feeling in our hearts of deep connection with people if we are more isolated, if we're more used to in a day of having, you know, being angry in the car because, you know, everybody around us is, you know, we don't know who they are, they're just a vehicle, or we're angry on our phones on social media and lashing out at people. How many opportunities do we have just in daily life to be in a caring conversation with someone else and have that feeling? So I almost feel in some ways we're out of practice. And for some, it's, they have forgotten how great that feels until they have an opportunity to actually remember how good that feels to be in community with other people and to share that feeling.
Thank you, Francis. And I think we do have Peter back. So Peter, we'll come back to you very quickly, Ashley, but before then, I'm just going to prepare you for a two-part question, which I'm going to just say now, because otherwise it's in my mind from what Francis was saying, which is, I suppose, because you are out there doing the work of trying to counter some of those narratives and ways perhaps we've got quite used to thinking, and or building new ways that we haven't thought. I love some of the lessons that you've learned from doing that with people, and lessons that you've probably had to teach yourself during that process. What can we take forwards in our work that's going to help us to help others to recreate community? But back to you, Peter, you were brilliantly describing some of the real challenges that you are facing in the communities face in Uganda and across Africa. So I'll give you back the floor. Potentially not, if he's frozen again. Peter, can you hear us? This is obviously one of the major challenges, which is technology and services. Yeah, I think Peter may have frozen. So Ashley, those two questions, maybe it was 1.5. Anyway, over to you.
Oh, could you say them one more time? I want to make sure I grasp.
No, of course. Yeah. So I think, as Francis was sort of describing, it's like learning a new language, sort of certainly a new mindset and approach. So the lessons that you've had to learn to do that yourself, and the experiences and lessons you've learned from doing that with other people, where you're trying to perhaps slightly change approaches, mindsets, ways of being with one another to something a bit different that's outside of perhaps the mainstream narrative that we consume.
Yeah, I think both in the school board work and in my community work, I think the common thread is that like Francis, I recognize that somewhere along the way we lost the tools on how to like handle conflict, um, on how to people and like love on each other. And I think the way that I've navigated it is kind of like taking a community approach, like looking at the ecosystem that I'm in and seeing ways to do it better. And what I will say is that that process has made me hold up a mirror to myself because I don't always get it right. Sometimes I get it way wrong. Sometimes I have to do apology tours like we did in my community, when we were at the height of conflict in the community. Um, and that process is very vulnerable and difficult. But I think every time that I've had to go through this like experience of growing and self-reflection and um, leaning into I think that that's what community is about is the ability to be resilient, get uncomfortable, have the tough conversations and love each other through it. And then I think that as someone that has been a reluctant leader and kind of like accidentally gotten into these roles, now I'm trying to learn the part about self-care, and I think that's important for everybody that's in a community because you do wanna show up as your best self, and I think just in the environment that we're living in, the amount of time that people are working and, the hustle culture that we're in, self-care feels like something that we have to try to find time on our schedules for, or it feels selfish because we have so many responsibilities. Um, so I guess I guess we just have to like just keep leaning in and experimenting and getting it wrong or getting it way right because there are so many highs and lows, but we have to at least try. We can't not try.
And I think, like as Julian was saying as well, it is something that is there within us. And I feel that once you can start to take people on that journey, that sense of connection that they get really does provide that energy. I'm going to now ask, as we're sort of at the midway point, one quick reminder to everyone to do submit your questions if you've got them, but I'm also loving seeing all the various comments and feedback we're getting in the chat. So thank you, keep that coming as well. I'm now going to set a very short challenge for everyone, which is to name 3 things, the 3 ingredients that for you make a thriving or connected, compassionate community. I know that there will be many, many things, but what are the top 3 things that come to your mind? As that's going to kind of then be the basis for the remainder of our conversation, so we can think about how we actually start to integrate those. Julian, you have for accepting that challenge first.
Okay, here we go. I think the very first thing is to recognize that you're already compassionate. That this is something that's so natural to us and so deeply embedded in us, we don't see it. But that natural care and compassion comes out multiple times in our life, in every day. And it might be simple things like holding a door open for somebody. It might be feeding your children first. It might be smiling at someone. It might be a kind word. It might be just paying attention to the people and the place around you. And it's not some kind of magic ingredient that you need training for to recognize. It's already there. You just need to be aware that you're compassionate. And the second bit is then go to recognize that this is something that is worth nourishing. just recognizing that in those moments of compassion, how do we feel? Does it make us feel good? Does it improve our relationships? Does it not a kind of theory, but just like in those moments of kindness and compassion, how do we feel? And then you can make a decision that whatever happens, that's something you want to nourish. And the third thing that I think is critical is recognizing that everyone has this same compassionate potential, because we are too often focused on our differences. And actually, if we just focus on our differences, we just think that we belong, we are right as we are, and other people don't belong and don't have value. But this is not the case at all. Actually, we have this common humanity, and I think that the kind of things that go along with that are the attitudes of humility and curiosity. If we recognize that we are compassionate, that other people are compassionate in the same way that we are, and that we are joined by these incredible qualities we have as human beings, then we can listen and we can be curious and we can have humility about accepting the best in people. And I think those are the kind of critical ingredients of community building. It's about seeing that we have this treasure of connection, and that treasure of connection can be applied in every circumstance we're in. Whenever there's anyone else around, and even connection to place, we carry with us this treasure. And so it's that this thing starts from the recognition of our own compassionate nature.
Thank you, Julian, and wonderfully preempting a future question that's coming up around sort of individual action as well. Ashley, what are your three treasures?
Okay, if I can tell you a little story. So, one of the first things that we did to build this unassociation in my community was create kindness rocks. So, basically, a bunch of folks around the neighborhood would get together and they would take rocks, they would paint positive quotes or silly stuff and like hide them around the community. And kids were finding them and rehiding them. And it just became this whole ongoing like scavenger hunt. So kindness comes to mind as like the first thing that I think we really need, because something so simple, like just that nice gesture to like a neighbor really kind of had a trickle effect and really like caught on. Like, yeah, there were I still have rocks from that whole process. And then the other thing is joy. Um, I think that's one of the ones that's hard to find sometimes when you're doing the work, because you're like doing you have your head down, um and just taking a moment to really be happy about the way that things are going, and that I think that really sustains the ability to do the work and keep showing up over time. And the last word that I had was forgiveness, because like I said, like in my process, sometimes I got it way right, sometimes I got it way wrong. And I remember, one of the times where I felt the loneliest is I had my son during the pandemic. And this is the height of, neighborhood shenanigans. It was starting to get better. But, in that moment, I'm like I feel very isolated, and I'm bringing a baby into this world. It's scary. And I'll never forget one of my neighbors, trying not to get like choked up, but she had created a kindness rock for my son. And it said, "Welcome to Violetville, Vinny." And she put his birth date and little blocks and left it on her porch. And at the time when she did that, it just meant so much. So forgiveness and joy was like both in that moment. And it's something so silly and so simple, but just that acknowledgement. And it was a full circle moment because it made me realize, like, we bought our house in the right neighborhood and this is our community and we do belong.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Ashley. Really touching story, and a sign as well. I think, like you've all been echoing, that they seem small, these things that we can do, but you've remembered that, and it still has such an emotional impact for you. And that you've both, Ashley and Julian, kind of went for, because I didn't necessarily specify what I meant by what makes a connected, woven community, but values, which I think is just really helpful in thinking how we can all play this part, because it's not necessarily about having one structure that has to be rolled out everywhere. It's about things that we can all tap into and interpret wherever we are. That's not to preempt what you're going to say, Francis, which it's over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Ash, I just love you. Ash was one of the first people I met when I joined Weave 2.5 years ago. And you are such a special person, Ash. I guess Matt, the way, of thinking about what makes a connected community. And I'm thinking of the spaces where when I felt I belonged, or I felt I could walk in and feel a sense of community in public spaces and in my community. I was thinking about these values. I was thinking of this work too in mindfulness, which I think connects strongly to Julian, what you were talking about, just a mindfulness, not just to pause and to think before saying and acting, but also then to build self-awareness around how are you moving in spaces? How are you interacting with others? And so that mindfulness practice, that is a constant goal, a constant practice. I was thinking of vulnerability, which takes courage to be vulnerable with others so that they can see themselves in you. And it's a real way to connect. It's part of the practice of community organizing, of sharing a challenge, a choice, and an outcome in your life. So when you were struggling and how you face that challenge, it is a way to share your values with people. So that balance of vulnerability, which takes courage. And something else that I've seen very much is patience. It takes time to get to know people and to build relationships. And sometimes I know that, I'm guilty of this too, of what's on the agenda, what do we need to do, instead of just slowing down. And I think that agenda, that need to get things done, can also lead to, I see ego in a lot of even community work, that people have an agenda or there's an ego involved. And when that gets in the way, it complicates everything and stops connection.
It's so true. Thank you, Francis. I'm going to try and bring these threads that you've all mentioned in the kind of remaining part of the conversation. I've noticed there's a few questions in the chat regarding sort of how to do this work of community building in contexts where you might not have, where pressure for resources is perhaps one of the reasons for creating a lack of a sense of community, or certainly a challenge for building communities. One of the many reasons we wanted Peter on this call was to be able to talk to that, because he is doing a lot of that work where he is in Uganda, but obviously he's having sort of technical difficulties. So Julian, I wonder if I can put that question to you, because I know that whilst your context is of course not the same, you do work with people across the world on community building and how you find and use resources. So perhaps if I could put that question to you.
So I think, thank you. And I think that the first thing to say is that suffering, inequality, difficulty, all of these things don't disappear because we're compassionate. I think that the starting, and the reason for saying that is to say it's not that they disappear, it's that when we face it together, it makes an enormous difference, and we find a richness and find solutions and ways of supporting each other, which is not possible if we take an individual approach. And so when it comes to communities where there are difficulties, that so much can be done by treasure mapping, by mapping out the people and the things and the skills and the gifts that are present in every single person, because the process of community building is that we all bring what we have to the pot, and that we really work on it together, so that at least the things that are going on are shared. And when we do that from a community perspective, what we do is that there's incredible creativity from the different kinds of people. So funnily enough, one of the places that I've been having conversations with recently are people in Uganda, and somebody from the one of the refugee camps there, and they were saying that they did community building in the refugee camps. And you think about, the type of things that can happen, which are kind of looking out for each other, sharing food, setting up education for children, resolving conflicts. These all are features of community building, so that this process of the first step of building relationships is absolutely critical. And the next thing that comes from that is recognizing the gifts and skills that are present in every community. And there's a great story about stone soup, which kind of and I'm sure the people on the call can look that up. But the stone soup story, it's a story of community building, that we each bring what we have and we add it together to make this incredible potential. And the final point I would like to add is that we sometimes think that the answer to our problems comes from the outside of our communities. And of course, sometimes we need that extra support from the outside. But the first thing is about recognizing strengths in community and getting the community to define what its problems are, seeking the solutions that are relevant and appropriate to the community. And then when help is needed from the outside, that's at the behest of the community. And for the people on the call, there's an incredible example of this with a TED talk from Ernesto Ciroli about, he describes how as a young man, as an Italian young man, he went to the Zambezi Valley to help the local people there grow food. And all they ended up doing was growing tomatoes for the hippos. And he talked about the impact of aid and about how that's often done top down, and it's not looking at nourishing communities and understanding communities from the inside, not from our own perspective from the outside. So the key, if you like, there is a technical skill of community building about how you go about that. Is, build relationships and discover the treasures in the communities and see what's important to those communities before asking for support from the outside. Does that answer your question, Matt? Does that get anywhere close to it?
It does. Thank you, Julian. Yeah, really great lessons and learning from, I mean, as I say, I know you're connected and working with so many groups across the world. So thank you. Francis, there was a question in the chat which also relates to one that I was sort of coming to, which is around doing this work in communities which then are part of a system, a society which may not work in favor of community building. And I think someone sort of articulated it as almost a system of oppression, or it's certainly a system of division and individualism rather than community. So how can the work that we do still build up to affect that bigger picture, or how does it stay resilient despite that bigger context?
Oh, let me take a shot at this by telling you a little bit about, I do want to tell you a little bit about what we've created, because I think it does answer that. A lot of the work at Weave is about organizing, and it's really about people, power, and change, which maybe is a little scary to some people, but it is about how do we empower people in communities to make the change that's needed, because as Julian's saying, they know their communities best. So what Weave isn't is an organization that comes into communities and does work. In our online community, it's a place where we welcome people from all over the world to meet other people, whether they could use answers to some questions they have about what works in their community, or they need a peer mentor. Something I'm really proud of is that we have a free learning center. And so in that learning center that anybody can access, there are the tools of organizing. And the main piece of that is public narrative. So it's how to tell your story of self, how to tell story of us. And so that is, how do you tell the story of your community as a collective? And then what is the story of now? What does the community itself identify as? Where do we need to move systems? How do we make it better? And also in that learning center are modules on, as Julian's talking about, asset-based community development. So it's with the Institute out of DePaul University in Chicago. So they actually built the module for us, with us. So it's practical tools. Also, one of my favorite ways to bring community together, and really that the power is with people, is facilitating circle. So using circle process, which brings in all of the voices to be heard in a gathering, in dialogue. And now we're loading up modules on care mapping, how to write grants, just very practical things, how to pitch the work that you're doing. So that's for people who are actually, maybe they're leading work where now they need to mobilize groups. So I guess the overall answer to that question, Matt, is that we have tools that we know are effective in community to bring people together, but also to push change. And so we are then here to support that work for communities who are working so hard.
Thank you, Frances. And then to Ashley, it's the classic question for you, I suppose, which is that for anyone listening who's eager to kind of get started or get involved, I suppose there would be an obvious question if you're based in America, which might be to join Weave, or I might say the Compassion Connectors program, either that takes your fancy or both. But in general, I suppose, what can just individuals do, no matter where you are, to start feeling and building that sense of community? Where might you look? Where might people look to take action?
Yeah, I definitely recommend, I co-sign on the Weave community, because we're all on there and we're like sharing resources. And I've met some folks that have just different approaches, or if you just need to chat with somebody about like challenges that you're having, it's really good. But I think what individuals can do is really like start looking at what you have to offer. Because I think sometimes people will go look for organizations, or and not just focus on like, what do I like to do? How can I contribute to my community? Before I even got involved with our community association networks, one of the things that I did to meet neighbors by accident was like picking up trash. And by picking up trash, I was helping beautify my community. I met neighbors that I would have not met otherwise. I became a part of a trash picking collective in the city, which is really funny. So we're still going strong. And that was like my contribution. And it's also interesting to see, like, of the neighbors that didn't like picking up trash, how supportive they were and like cheering us on. Like one time we actually had somebody roll by and like say, here's $20. Thank you so much for doing this. I've been driving past this every day and it's been an eyesore. So it's just looking at little things that you already like to do. My thing just happens to be picking up trash, and finding ways to like contribute your skills and talents to like a larger ecosystem. And it I saw the question about the whole systems of oppression, and I think that is part of it, is doing what you can, because sometimes that can feel overwhelming. Um, and I think the little things are actually more impactful and more sustainable long term. Because as someone that's been in a lot of organizing spaces, that's also a challenge, is not creating new spaces that perpetuate the same models or possibly the same harm. So I think taking it back to like a really simple approach and saying, what can I do long term to pitch in and do my part, does actually long term challenge those systems and make it more accessible for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I think it's such a powerful lesson. It's one that we've definitely tried to incorporate. As I mentioned, I'm going to do our plug for the Compassion Connectors program, which is all about creating communities of compassion. And that is entirely encouraging people to be led by your passion first and foremost, and to go to where you want to be creative, and to look at your skills and the skills of those around you as the starting point, because that's what's going to sustain you and that's going to help make the difference. Julian, I know in your answer to my previous question, you said to do all of that work before you look to the outside. But looking at the outside, I just wonder, are there things that you think governments, and I suppose I am speaking, from your position in the United Kingdom, and perhaps thinking also about other Western nations, but generally trying to spread that out across the world, are there things that governments or international organizations can do to support people to feel a greater sense of community?
So I think one of the places that kind of allows you to get a good handle on this are the 5 action points of the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion, and they are, if you like, the 5 action points which really kind of focus the attention on how you can have a positive impact on community. And I'll try and remember all 5 action points. Is creating healthy policy, and then there's the 3 middle ones are creating supportive environments, increasing personal skills, and creating community capacity is not the right word, but about making sure that when communities come together, they're nourished. And what happens so often is that and the final one is reorientation of services. And what happens so often is that when you don't take a community development approach, is that services and organizations come into community, and even when they're really well intentioned, the impact can be to make communities disappear. And so what happens is that when these organizations stop providing their services, you leave behind a wasteland. And so it's really important to understand that everything has to be focused around community first, that the convening of community and the building of relationships is the first step. And then the community is in a position to say what they would find helpful. And so they can then ask for the help and support that is the kind of thing that is most appropriate to them. This is the story of international development, and it's also the story of how we build communities in the places in which we live. If we define communities by what they lack, then we are putting a label on communities which makes them powerless, which increases their sense of powerlessness. So there's an absolutely key and fundamental part of this, which is understanding communities from the inside, understanding community strengths, understanding the relationships, the potential of space. And if we can do that, we can avoid creating some of the damage that has been done and think about how we nourish community. So I think there are so many examples of this happening in a fantastic way from all over the world. These Francis mentioned ABCD, which is a incredible example of that, and Cormac Russell, who is a kind of mover and shaker, and it says, when you know one community, you know one community. So that sense of humility and curiosity is fundamental, and we have to, whatever we do, we have to find community first and go from there. Is that clear enough? If I answered that kind of clearly enough?
Certainly did for me, Julian. Thank you. So we've got 3 minutes left, and I'm going to ask. We're just going to do a quick round robin. And what I'd like to ask you is one thing that has surprised you doing community work. What's something that has really taken you aback or changed your mind, perhaps, about the approach that you've taken to this work? While you're thinking, I am going to just obviously. I just want to do a shout out to Peter, who, it's not necessarily entirely uncommon. Obviously, has some data connection problems, but Peter and the team of people out there who are doing the connectors work are just deeply wonderful and inspiring people in the stuff that they do. And I think it speaks so strongly to what you just said there, Julian, about when you know one community. There's so many different challenges being faced, so many different ways of approaching it that I've learned just from observing and working with the communities that we are working with and the people we are working with and the ideas that they come up with. Peter is no exception to that. So he's, as I said in the introduction, the national lead of the connectors in Uganda, and a just wonderful, deeply committed person. So I wanted to do a shout out for him, as he hasn't obviously really been able to engage as much as we would have liked. So coming back, the one thing that surprised you or changed your mind. Francis, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm not sure how much well, I will say it surprised me in a really wonderful way, because I'm a more reserved person. So for me to visit new communities where I've never been as a representative of Weave, whether it's in a large city or it's in a rural town, a small rural town. I go back to Julian said, the building of relationships is the first step. And I've just been so overwhelmed by willingness of people, the hospitality and the willingness to really welcome a stranger when it's around, when you begin with the relationships, when you're there with humility, with curiosity, and with care. It's just been an overwhelmingly just really wonderful feeling.
Thank you, Francis. I should have let you go last with that one. I think it'd be a brilliant way to end. But Julian, do you want to go next?
So I think for me, I came at this because I came at it through, I'm a palliative care physician a retired palliative care physician looking after people who are dying, and got interested in the whole business about relationships and community building, compassionate communities, and saw examples from all over the world. And one of the things that I think that the kind of I don't know whether it's cemented it or whether it somehow said it clearly, but coming across this whole business about, realizing that survival of the fittest is a Victorian nightmare, and seeing, like, I run a podcast called Survival of the Kindest, and talking to people from all over the world about their stories and their research and the groundbreaking discoveries about how survival of the kindest is so deeply embedded in us. And that's incredibly liberating, because it means that everyone has this amazing potential that's active in everyone. And then that's, if you like, hearing stories of this from all over the world is incredibly inspiring and humbling, and it's universal. It's not in this type of community or that type of community or this person or that person. It's about being human, and I found that amazing.
Thank you, Julian. And Ashley?
I think the thing that surprised me the most, because I also am a big fan of history, and so through this whole journey, I wanted to like go backwards, like dig into my family's ancestry and just the history of this country before it became a country. And over time, I think the thing that surprised me is that what we had, like way, way, way back, is this village that surrounded families. And I think that that's almost like what it surprised me that that's what we really need now, especially for families. Because I look at the youth that I work with and how much knowledge they have to share and how like underutilized they are. And then I also look at elders, and I think just the nature of things. Sometimes we, throw people away and don't see them as valuable anymore. Or yeah. So those two groups being able to like create a village or give people a village, I think it was kind of shocking because it sounds so simple, but like, how are we doing that? And how's that like showing up in the work that we do, that we're looking at the two groups of people that are oftentimes like the most vulnerable, flipping that into kind of like what Francis was saying, looking at it from an abundance perspective and just saying, like, that's the village. Let's just make it.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you all three of you, and to Peter. And we are planning to do some future events on this question, perhaps looking at certain aspects of the building back, I suppose, of communities. And I hope that we'll be able to bring Peter or other connectors as well to be part of those conversations, and similarly Weave and the wonderful Weavers team that you have out there. It's been a real pleasure being with you all, to see your fantastic comments and questions coming in. And I hope to see you again at a future GCC / maybe co-hosted with Weave event. Thank you all.